Thanks for joining us today in the Storycraft Cafe. We have an amazing show for you today. My friends, Jamie Castle and Rhett Bruno, join us today. Jamie, you might know as Steve Bowyer, um, you know, pen names, and the inimitable Roger Clark, who narrates Jamie and Rhett's new book, Cold as Hell, the Black Badge series, book one. We're here to talk all about audiobooks and that end of publishing. And I think we're going to have a fantastic conversation today. So welcome, Jamie, Rhett, and Roger.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. So let's get started with a fun question. Jamie, we'll start with you since in our little square format, you're next to me here. What is a piece of writing advice that someone has given you that has stuck with you? Maybe it's good advice, maybe it's horrifically bad, something that just sticks out in your mind that someone has given you that you look back on frequently.
I think you and I have talked about this one before, and I feel like I could give you like 100 examples of really bad advice that I've gotten over the years. It changes with the tides, right?
Yeah.
Like, there used to be the advice, write a short book. Then there was the advice, write a long book. Then there was take a long book and make it into 3 short books. And it was like, it was like constant. Nobody knew what you were supposed to do the job. But I think one of the worst pieces of advice that I've ever received as a writer was, don't worry about your first draft, just vomit it out. And although that might work for some people, what that does for most people is discourages them when they go back and look over it and realize what a piece of crap they just wrote. And it's like impossible to fix because you didn't have a plan or anything in mind. And I did that for a while. I did that for 20 years when I was trying to finish my first book. And ultimately, I finished my first book because I learned that you can't just vomit out words, because then you end up with vomit on paper.
Well, and I remember 10 or 12 years ago when the indie revolution was really kicking up and people were talking about just write a book and get it out as fast as you can and then publish it. And then, stuff like that gets over to someone like Roger and he's like, who wrote this piece of crap? This is atrocious. What about you, Rhett? Is there a piece of advice that sticks out to you, good, bad, or both?
I think the biggest thing is always like long series sell, and people take that the wrong way.
Yeah.
Like long series are great when they're already selling, but as Ethan Books, I can't tell you how many people send a submission. They're like, I have a 12 book arc plan. I'm like, all right, but what if the first 3 don't sell?
Yeah.
And people wind up writing these like 12 book epics that are just not even being read by anybody past book 1. So that's something we always turn that advice around, like do 3 books and leave an opening to do more. But like you need ending points. Otherwise you get stuck writing forever for nobody. Right.
And I also add, Rhett, that when you say leave an opening, they take that as don't finish the trilogy.
Yeah. No, like,
so then we get to book 3 and they're like, okay, now can we do book 4? Because the story doesn't end. And you're like, come on, wait, what? And then we're like, why didn't our editors tell us that the story didn't end?
Yeah. Because they don't know, right? Like they're like, oh, I guess there'll be a book 4, but like they don't know the details of the contract. So sometimes you just really have to be honest and talk with the authors and be like, look, like it needs to end. Keep a subplot open or have an idea for how you could bring it back. But
right.
Like if you don't leave yourself out points, you're either going to piss off what few readers are there or exhaust yourself writing something for nobody.
I got 8 more books. 8 more books.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard Jim Butcher talk about that conversation he had with a writing teacher where he was, telling her these ideas and she said, okay, now go write an outline. And he comes back with a 25 book outline. And she was like, no, I just meant this book. Just get to an end point here. Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah. Jim got lucky, right? I mean,
yeah. Yeah,
great.
I mean, it worked out for
His
him.
books are amazing, but like,
yeah,
so are a lot of books that don't sell. And he was lucky enough to be able to put out 17.5 of them already.
yeah. I think he's going to be okay. Roger, what about you? Has there been anyone that has offered advice to you in the work that you do in acting, voice acting, narrating, that's been really good or really bad?
Well, really good advice in my field is not to take things personally, even when it's personal. And if you sling enough, shall we say, feces to the wall, something will eventually stick. I always believe that work begets work, and I think that's true for a lot of artists, at least ones that are easy enough to work with, anyway.
Yeah, work begets work is that enough is not given to we like to think of writing and as this sort of ethereal thing that the angels come down and bless you with an idea, and sometimes that happens, and sometimes you just have to put your butt in the chair and get to work every day. And
I saw a great quote from Taika Waititi recently, and he said, sometimes it's just sitting in front of a computer screen and just staring at it for a couple of hours.
Right.
That's still writing. It's still writing. It's still valid, and all writers go through that,
Yeah. I told my wife recently that, she said something like, cause I'm finishing up like my 21st book in like the last 3 or 4 years. And she's like, I don't understand how you keep writing things. And of course I have co-writers. So there's a lot of things that are, mixed into that. But I'm like, sometimes my muse is the mortgage payment. Like
100%.
I don't need a muse. I need to know that I can pay bills, and you just do the job.
Yeah. So the muse is a dirty capitalist.
Yes.
Yeah.
My kids need to eat food. Imagine that.
That's a great artistic incentive.
Yeah. Roger, there are probably a number of people listening that recognize your voice, but maybe don't recognize Roger Clark as being attached to that. You have been thrust into pop culture over the last several years from this video game that you characterized the main character for. How did you get involved with the Red Dead Redemption series?
Well, I worked in gaming for maybe my first gaming job was maybe about 16, 17 years ago.
Okay.
I trained in Britain, and I was pretty good at regional accents. So, I started out in theater, but it quickly came into voice work because I had a bit of a command over some dialects, and that led to voice acting in video games, and then eventually performance capture too. And I auditioned like any other job. Of course, the video game industry is so secretive. I didn't know what I was auditioning for. They're all called Untitled Video Game Project when you walk into the door. All I know is that they wanted me to wear cowboy boots and that they wanted some sort of like a West Texan accent. So I really enjoyed performance capture. I think it's a fascinating medium, that and voice acting. So I ran into the place. And one thing led to another, and eventually I found out that I was going to be the protagonist of Red Dead Redemption 2. And I worked on that 5 years.
Wow.
That project took, and it was.
We waited for it.
It was a gift.
Whiz.
It was the longest contract I've ever had, and it was a real joy. Joy working with all the people of Rockstar Games, and I've been able to supplement that with narrating audiobooks as well. I've been doing audiobooks since I was a child. My dad used to do newspaper for the blind. We would record it onto 6 cassettes at a time. We would do the Star Ledger from New Jersey. I'd help him cut out the little articles and whatnot. And then when we moved to Ireland when I was a kid, he brought it with him, and he started it up with the local newspaper there, the Sligo Champion.
Wow.
So I've been doing it for a long time. I love it. I love it. I love it very much.
You mentioned that the Red Dead Redemption role that you had was motion capture, and I think a lot of people assume, because they don't know any different, that the voices they hear in video games come from a guy standing in a booth, and you just have pages and pages of dialogue that you're going to read that will be plugged into the game depending on what choices that you make, and that maybe you don't have any idea what the story is. You're just reading different pieces of dialogue that may or may not pop up in the game, but that's not exactly how that works, is it?
A lot of the industry is still voice acting, and I don't think it's ever going to go away. But a great majority of it now is performance capture, and performance capture really isn't that dissimilar to film or TV. The only difference being is we would work on sets, and we wouldn't have costumes. We would be wearing spandex with shiny balls on it.
So just like Rhett on a random Thursday.
Shiny balls.
Exactly. Yeah.
With spandex.
But
Yeah.
and then one of the other differences too is that the camera can be anywhere, and indeed you can change where the camera is in post whilst you're editing. It's an amazing medium that grants you as the performer a lot of freedoms, and it grants the filmmaker and the storyteller a lot of freedom too. Yeah, and of course, everybody says voice acting because that is what it used to be, and it used to be 100% that. But now it's kind of 50. It depends from studio to studio, but performance capture is a huge part of gaming now, and it's a huge part of cinema too. I mean, we're going to see Avatar 2 when it comes out later this year. That's the exact same way I worked on Red Dead 2.
Wow. So Jaime and Rhett, the Black Badge series. Jaime, you and I have had numerous conversations about our shared love of the Dresden Files, and we mentioned Jim Butcher earlier, and that's a series that I have absolutely loved for years and years, and I know you have too. How did this come about? This project, when it has a bit of a Dresden Files feel to it, in that there's earthbound heroes with connections to other things, kind of the ethereal, but it very quickly establishes itself as its very own property. That's not just a Dresden Files ripoff with a cowboy. That's not it. It has a feel of that, but that's not it. Where did this idea come from?
Well, James and Harry are very different people. Very, very different people. I'm on my third or fourth listen through of the Dresden Files right now. I'm on book 12 Changes. And I remember I was listening to the Dresden Files while I had lost my job. Things had been chaos in my life.
Yeah.
I'd been listening to the Dresden Files, and I'm in my hot ass garage in Texas writing, because that's where I had to set up my office, because I have kids. And so I'm in my office, and this character sort of just kept talking to me. James Crowley kept talking to me. I didn't know his name yet. As a matter of fact, James Crowley is a highway sign here in Texas. There's James Avenue and Crowley Road. And I kept driving by it, seeing James Crowley. I'm like, that's his name. And I wrote nonsense. I wrote 10,000 words of nonsense in a day. It was just James Crowley walking into this town called Dead Acre. And I had this in my head, this sort of background character where he was the angel of death reincarnated. And, I went to Rhett, and of course we have, Athon published one of the most successful Weird Westerns of all time, a book called Make Me No Grave by Haley Stone, which was an amazing, amazing book.
Phenomenal book.
And I had just finished editing that. So anyway, I'm writing this character, and I went to Rhett, and I'm like, hey, I've got this idea. And he's like, it's a weird Western. What do you want to do with it? Come on. I mean, just write it. Just have fun with it. So I wrote some stuff. And then at some point, Audible Originals messaged us. We had done something with them previously, and they said, hey, do you have any short fiction that you'd like to put on our platform?
They were just starting the Plus platform. So
nice.
We were secretly told about it, and they wanted us to see if we had anything short to try on it.
So Dead Acre was like nothing at the time. It was 10,000 nonsensical words. There was no story. There was no plot. And it was just it. And Rhett read it, and he's like, listen, this character is great. The voice is great. The sort of the Western cliche, if we could say it, because if you've read Dead Acre or Cold as Hell, it's Western. It's cliche Western done with a spin. And sometimes we get reviews that are like, it was very cliche. Well, no shit. That was the purpose. We wanted to give people who love Westerns what they love. And so Rhett said, okay, but there's no story. So we messaged Audible Originals back. We gave them maybe like 5,000 words that Rhett and I had crafted.
I think so.
And they said, yeah, we love it. Let's finish it. So then Rhett and I powwowed. I don't think we're allowed to say powwowed anymore.
So, we were going to do what, like a 10,000 word thing. They've said, yeah, anything between like 10,000 and 20 words. And as we planned it out, it became 30,000 words, which is like really long for a novella. But, you know, they didn't care. They just weren't going to pay us more than, but we didn't care because we wanted to make it something cool. So that was how we started building out the lore, how the Black Badges work, the angels, and all the different relationships. And the main thing we set out to was not just to do a weird Western where it's like, it's a Western and there's some magic, right? Like we wanted the magic to be integral to this world.
Yeah.
A big part of it instead of just some side thing that makes it not fully a Western.
Yeah. Can we take a sidebar for just a second?
Yeah.
You talked about cliches. What's the difference in a cliche and the idea of writing to market or writing what you or just understanding what your audience is looking for? Because, you know, one thing we know in indie publishing now or small press publishing, whatever, is that you need to identify your market and write what you know that market will buy. Because if you're writing things that you think are cool, but there's no audience out there for it, you can be an artist all day long, but if no one wants to buy it, then this is just a passion project for you. How do you identify cliches, or maybe it's just a vernacular dispute?
Trope,
you know?
trope could be the word.
Trope. Yeah. Thank you. I couldn't grab the word trope for some reason.
I don't think there is a market for this. Like, that's why when we said at the start, like, oh, let's do a weird Western, I was like, all right, let's do something short and see what happens. Like, we didn't expect Dead Acre to explode like it did because there's no market to write for, right? Like, our books, Cold as Hell has been out for a little over a month and is probably already one of the most successful weird Westerns ever because there's like 5 that anyone can find on Amazon at any time. So I think the tropes were more like classic Western movies that even a lot of stuff out of Red Redemption. I mean, those games hit all the tropes too, because there's stuff that a Western needs to have. But we wanted those things to also involve magic and be a little bit different, but be something that Western lovers could appreciate too.
Yeah.
Well, I always say that a cliche is a cliche on purpose, right? Like,
everyone knows the cliches.
Yeah, man.
And every book has them. And like no reader ever says what the cliche that they thought was a cliche is. It's just a word that gets thrown out in reviews a lot for everything.
Well, just sidle back into how Roger came into this, because I think that's probably what most people who are joining us today want to know, right? Because Roger, I could listen to Roger. I do listen to Roger. I've listened to my own books 30 times just to hear Roger's voice. My son makes us listen to Dead Acre and Cold as Hell every single night before bed. He's 8 years old, so judge me later. But
it's not appropriate, but
but I wrote it. So if I wrote it, my rule is if I wrote it, my son can listen to it. If I don't want my son to listen to it, then I better write things that I want him to listen to. But as we finished Dead Acre, we were having the discussion. Rhett and I are really, really big audio guys. We're bigger in audio than we are on ebook. And I think that's because we write for audio. We know what audio listeners want, because I listen to audio incessantly.
Yeah.
And so when we finished it, we actually didn't know Roger was going to narrate Dead Acre. We actually did not know that Roger did voice acting. We just knew him from Red Dead Redemption. And I know Red is too. We are giant Red Dead Redemption fans. I waited for Red Dead 2 for 12 years, like everyone else, or however long it was. And then I didn't leave.
That long.
I think it was that long. I think it was 12 years, 2008 to 2020 or something like that. And then we had Undead in between, but that didn't satisfy. As a matter of fact, like people always say this is as if Arthur Morgan came back to life. Spoiler. So as we were talking afterwards, we're like, okay, who should narrate this? And of course, my first thought was, how about James Marsters? Because he's Dresden, right? And he hasn't done anything other than that. So I said, I was on the phone. I said to Rhett, I wish Arthur Morgan narrated books. And I hear keyboard clacking in the background. It's like, he does. Roger Clark, he's done audio. So we texted or messaged Steve Feldberg at Audio Originals, said, can we get Roger Clark? And he came back, he goes, that's perfect. Let's do it. And I think maybe 6 hours later, we had confirmation that Roger would do it. So when we wrote Cold as Hell, we knew Roger Clark. As a matter of fact, the both of us, when we did our read through of the book, we read it in Roger's voice.
An impression of how it sounds.
I'll say I got damn close, but I'll leave that for,
because it has to fit like that Western style of talking.
He's got a cadence.
Writing, yeah.
Roger, you
certainly hit it on the nail on the head. It's excellent. It just jumped out at me, and it's right. There's a lot of books that are perfect for audio, and there's a lot of great books out there that don't necessarily work well in audio. But the way that you fellas write dialogue and the way that the character, it just really does jump off from the page, and it was a joy to work on, an absolute joy to work on. Yeah.
So let me ask this: you said you write specifically for audio, and I know, what the Athon business model is. A lot of times is Audible first or Audible Originals, and ebook is a it works in conjunction with that, but you're focused on audio primarily. What does it mean to write for audio? What when you are writing, what things are going through your mind that say this will work better spoken aloud rather than the person creating the character in their head? What does it mean to write for audio?
Well, Rhett and I specifically write to audio. We don't encourage our authors in Athon to do that, but Rhett and I have established an audio career. We started with Luke Daniels. We knew Luke Daniels was going to read the Buried Goddess saga, so we knew how he was going to perform it. Ray Porter, etc. We knew the narrators and how they were going to do it. Roger probably was the easiest because Roger has such a distinct way of delivering lines. Writing for audio for me meant that, as a matter of fact, you can look at our ratings on ebook versus our ratings on audio, and you can tell that ebook fans don't get everything that the audio readers get. Like when it's a different experience. It's a different experience. When I write, and when I'm just talking for me, but I think Rhett agrees with this, and I'll shut up because I could talk forever. When I write a dialogue line, I know that Roger's going to get the context because he's an intelligent person who understands the context of a line. So I don't need to have prose after that line to explain how that line was spoken.
Right.
So when you read it in audio, sometimes, or when you read it in ebook, sometimes the line will be a line that's said with surprise or with vehemence or with this or with that. And a typical ebook would say he said such and such vehemently, or he said such and such pointing a finger. But like Roger's going to put that into the performance.
Right.
So you step back from prose a little bit and you let the dialogue do the talking.
And I never realized you trusted me that much.
Oh,
it's
man.
an honor.
Honestly, that's why it helps so much to know how someone sounds, right? Because there are also narrators who, like you perform, there are some narrators who are great that just read like a Jefferson Mays, what was his name? Who did
Jefferson
the circuit. Like,
yeah.
When we know who we're writing for, that's what really helps. Like if we're writing a book specifically for R.C. Gray or something, when you don't, then it's kind of hard because you don't know if you're going to get a narrator who's super into voices and performance or someone who just does an amazing read through.
Right.
But I also think that me and Steve, our natural writing style is, and proven by the reviews and everything, is always more of a fit for audio. We're just very character focused, which I think helps audio, right? Because you're hearing the character, and that's something for me that makes it more written for audio, especially like first person. It's like someone telling you a story. So
right.
And so the way you guys write is so economical too, because it's just packed with quality and content, and the dialogue, it just really jumps off at the page at you. The characterizations are established so quickly. That's what impressed me particularly. is how quickly you can just understand who these people are. And in what we've said, like, it's a very established genre, the Western, but you also you've put a little spin on it that is so interesting and engaging, and something, like we said, you've never seen before. Yeah, it's a real joy. It was a real joy to work on.
Roger, what is your process like when you sign on to a new project, maybe with people that you don't know, with authors that you don't know? What is your process like from receiving that manuscript to getting familiar with the story, identifying the characters? Like, can you just kind of walk us through how you kind of make out a game plan for how you're going to narrate this book?
Sure. So I usually read it once or twice before I record, and
Okay.
the first time I'm really looking for words that I just don't know the pronunciation of.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, then I'll be looking at characters, and in my head I'll be coming up with, I'll be taking a note of what defines these specific characters, and trying to come up with a voice that would suit that. And then I'm very grateful when I can speak to the authors about it, because nobody knows the content better than them. And
is that ever an issue? Are there authors that don't want to speak to you? That I've listened to audiobooks before, and where they mispronounce names and things that it would take a simple Google search to understand, or
yeah,
a conversation with the author, they would have cleared that right up.
most of the time
it's
they're
atrocious.
always available, but sometimes just through time constraints or what have you,
Yeah.
sometimes they're not alive. And then you're a bit more, but the producer then would speak with you in those
Gotcha.
instances. But the author is almost always available, because they understand, especially these days, how much of a cornerstone the audiobooks is in the entire
Right.
industry. So yeah,
And authors, make yourselves available to your audiobook narrators, please.
and that's very rarely been a case for me. And it's always great, because you can't get a better understanding of the content than with speaking with the author. I often find, and I probably shouldn't say this, but sometimes the author is the best narrator, because they know they are so intimate with their own work, they know exactly how it should be delivered. Some authors not so much, but I find a lot of authors are excellent narrators because they're so familiar with their work. But I've always really, really appreciated the communication that I've had with authors, and when you're working on something, and to know that Steve and Rhett and Jaime, beg your pardon, were always a quick email away, and they were always able to answer my questions. But the story, like we were saying, just that unique spin on what is the oldest genre in cinema, at least, and how everyone has a deep understanding of what the Western is. And then to have something that gives it a little bit of a spin on it was just such a joy to work with. Yeah, absolutely. I got a funny story another way about how audiobooks has changed the industry, and this might be going a little bit off topic, but romance novels, before audiobooks, romance novels were always written from the female perspective.
Right.
And then audiobooks came about, and publishers started to soon realize women like to hear a man's voice. So it changed the way romance novels are written. And what you have now is we'll have the male protagonist, so that they can get a male narrator, or you'll do a chapter each where one chapter is the man and the other chapter is the woman, and they'll have multicasts. Audiobooks have revitalized so many aspects of the publishing and book industry. It's kind of crazy when you think about it.
I never thought of that the way that audiobook then affects the way new books are coming out. That's something to chew on, for sure. Is it ever jarring to you, Roger, to be so associated with a character and then by extension a genre, as you have been with Arthur Morgan, and the way that you are inhabiting so many people's minds with your unique voice?
No, not. I mean, I've always tried to resist pigeonholes. You know, I find that the more you keep your options open, that the more diverse you can be, the more diverse work becomes available to you. But I love Arthur, and I love the fact that that I've been able to reach out to so many people and such a large audience with one. I mean, that's what an artist's dream is to have your work enjoyed by as many people as possible. And Cold as Hell and Dead Acre is very much, I very much inhabit the same cadences and voice as Arthur Morgan. But a lot of my other work in audiobooks, I do a lot of Irish stuff. I do British stuff. I enjoy Arthur, but I also enjoy doing other things very much as well. And I'm always going to be grateful for what Red Dead has done for me.
Well, let me. So we have a character in Cold as Hell named Irish, and she's a bodyguard of sorts for a historical figure that I will leave spoilers out on.
Okay, we won't spoil it. Yeah.
But Irish exists solely because I knew that Roger could do an Irish accent well, and so I texted Rhett one day. I'm like, "Hey, we need to have a character that's Irish,"
but then we accidentally made 2 Irish people.
Yeah,
we made 2 Irishes, remember? And then we changed one of them to be something else.
Who was the first?
Josh Hayes.
Oh, Picklefinger. Picklefinger was originally an Irishman. Yep.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
And then
I
we were
thought
both
you
like,
referring to
wait.
the person that we don't want to spoil. Okay, right.
We were both like, wait, like he doesn't meet that many people in this book, and we're gonna have 2 of them in the Wild West be Irish. Maybe.
I mean, there were a lot of Irish folks.
I know, it just.
But you're right. No, I forgot about that.
It was just funny.
That's hilarious. So, Jamie, you come up with the concept and you write the 10,000 nonsensical words as your words, not mine.
Yep.
Where you're just feeling out the character, feeling out the setting, just kind of letting the words inform how you're thinking about the story. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say, for sake of, Rhett, I want everyone to realize that Rhett had everything to do with James Crowley as well, because James Crowley was a different character before I sort of brought him to Rhett.
Well, that's where I was going. With
yeah,
that
for sure.
Yeah,
go ahead. I'll let you continue then.
No, I was just going to say that how, like, Rhett, when do you come in to the story, and did you have a clear vision for what Jamie was working on and where he was trying to establish this character? What is your role at that point?
Yeah, so I mean, we've been working together for so long. I knew how he works, which sometimes he just needs to write an idea, get it out of his head, and move on. And he shows me all of them, and sometimes I'm like, like, what are we gonna do with this? But this one, like the first page, you could just feel the voice. I was like, this sounds great. We just would need to figure out where it goes. And again, like he said, at the start, it was very, very biblical. He was an angel and everything. And we sort of pared that all back to make him less powerful. We wanted to someone who doesn't have all the answers and all the powers and everything. We really wanted it to be a more human story, even though he's undead. But that was sort of what I did, and it came in as we took basically, like, out of the 10,000 words, I just needed to hear the voice in the first page, which the first page or so was basically telling the story of how he died. And that was great, and that's what we kept and reworked that into everything else. Basically, that first scene in Dead Acre is only a page or so, right?
Maybe a couple pages, but that's the only thing I think we really kept, which of course was hard to see 8,500 words or 7, whatever it was, just thrown away. I mean, I think he met Phelps. I think there was that intro where they're in the saloon, but like it all changed. It all changed.
Yeah, I mean, this is our style is those 10,000 words. I work through them and I try to turn them into something. And then we have like an outline of where we want it to go, and we realize it's not working. We both get frustrated. And we're like, let's just let's just actually start from the beginning instead of trying to massage something that doesn't work anymore.
How long have you guys been working together?
Like
4 years, 5 years,
5 years, I think.
5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so
Wow.
we had done one standalone book and a 6-book epic fantasy series together. Which again, this happened even in the epic fantasy series. Like Steve might invent a new character, and then we have to like. So it's something we've done a lot of, just taking a character and building their role and background and stuff. So that's where I helped with this. So this was the first time we did first person, which again, it's actually harder, I think, or it takes longer for 2 people to write first person than it would for someone to write it alone, because we basically have to both adopt the same voice.
And I would imagine that you both need to have an intimate agreement as to who this person is to be able to mutually know and write about for the same person in the first. I never appreciated that. Yeah, it takes a lot. I would imagine it would take a huge amount of teamwork and understanding to both agree who James Crowley actually is.
Yeah, it takes a lot of writing and rewriting or revising compared to Buried Goddess Saga, which was third person. We each sort of took a lead on a specific characters. So like you could tell, I think it makes it great because every voice for every character is actually different. You know, it's not just an author trying to give characters different voices, because it's different authors. They really do have them. But yeah, for this, it was about bringing everything together. So it does take longer, I think, than if just one of us wrote it alone. But it makes for like a really surprising story because we both are kind of throwing ideas into it as it goes.
Well, I think we're both trying to impress each other. I think that's part of it too.
Never discount that.
You have an immediate audience, right? Like I'll write a chapter and I will know that Rhett's going to read this. And so my goal is to insert things that make him go, that was good.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And if it's a comedy, like we're working on like a fantasy comedy book, and there was the one line about the bone that just made me crack up. And so when we're doing that, like there was a funny character in the fantasy series. It helps with jokes too. Like if they're landing, if a twist surprises, like I or him might have killed off somebody in the fantasy series where there were so many characters. And then it just happens, right? The other person doesn't expect it until they see those words. So it does make for fun back and forth.
When Rhett, you are more of an outliner. If I remember your writing process,
not really more than Steve. Yeah.
Well, Steve and I have had a number of conversations about his onion method of writing, and you write something and then you go back and add more layer and depth, and then go back and add more layer and depth. How does that work when you're co-writing? What is your process for establishing, each writer's territory, if you will, or is everything shared? And I know in Buried Goddess, where you could take different viewpoint characters, that is a clear delineation of whose is whose. But what do you do when you've got a first person character and this is one unified story? What does that feel like to co-author?
Chaos. Honestly, like our method for each chapter might be different as we go. Just because first, like again, most co-authorships, especially in first person, is probably one person writes a really, really rough draft. Then the other person goes through it based off of an outline, and it's like sort of a full back and forth. But we do it like chapter by chapter together. So in first person, it really, like, I don't think there's a method that we could teach anyone for these books. It's very, very weird.
I wrote about 4,000 words of this scene where Roger gets to encounter this succubus at a brothel, and it's packed full of. I think what I take most joy in this series is the one-liners that I know Roger's going to get to say or have to say.
They're pretty good.
And so I've got this 4,000 words that's just jam packed with like Western fantasy. Yes, amazing, right? And then I show it to Fred and he's like, "Cool, that's not going in the book."
Well, no, we are gonna use it, but in a different area. Like we're gonna give it a reason in the story. But that's what always Steve will write all these one-liners, and we both have like notepads of one-liners, and then somehow we'll work them into the book. That's why like we don't throw anything out. But yeah, it is a longer, harder process with first person. It's not something that most people probably do because it takes constant back and forth and messaging and calls and stuff because you can't really go off the rails. It's just one guy compared to third person, which is what I would imagine most like equal parts co-authorships are doing. But again, it's rare that two people are actually writing each thing together. Most co-authorships, you're going to have someone taking the lead on rough draft or based off of an outline and kind of a back and forth in that sense.
Rhett and I wrote a short book together. I don't even know if it's available anymore. It was called Two Authors, One Book, Co-Writing Murder Free. And
I have the audiobook.
The whole like point of that book was we have a lot of co-authors with Athon, and generally those relationships don't end well. I don't, somehow Rhett and I have made it through. I think a lot of that is that I respect the fact that Rhett knows how to tell a story way better than me. So when he tells me something story-wise doesn't work, I generally don't argue. He's always the one that Dead Acre the story was the story because of Rhett. Cold as Hell, Rhett didn't necessarily outline it strongly, but he outlined it enough for me to know what I'm supposed to be writing. Otherwise, Roger'd have been just running all over fake texts.
Yeah, I mean, we never even outline like I do maybe a page of notes in a Gmail draft or something. We're not huge outliners. I'm not when I write on my own either. Even the Buried Goddess saga, which seems really, really well planned out, is mostly just us remembering stuff from talking on calls. Like we're not big outliners. We just sort of know the ending we want to get to.
Yeah. Rhett, the books that you author by yourself, just as Rhett Bruno, tend to be kind of adventure-based sci-fi, a more futuristic sci-fi. What is it like when Jaime comes to you with this weird fantasy, ideas? What is it like for a sci-fi writer to go to a different world and to start thinking, to completely switch gears to the kinds of stories that you by yourself would come up with?
Well, at the time, I hadn't written sci-fi in a while because we wrote 6 epic fantasy books in a row that were really long, like up to 200,000 word books. And then I wrote The Roach, which isn't even science fiction or fantasy at all. So it wasn't really hard because first person to me, like you're writing the character. It doesn't really matter where they are. We could have written the same story with him in sci-fi. It would have been like Star Wars basically, but then there wouldn't be that actual real authentic Western and accent feel and all of that. So my main thing was like, who are we writing this for? Because like publishers gave up on Blackstone is the one who signed this, and we submitted Cold as Hell out everywhere based off of the success of Dead Acre. And Blackstone's the only one that offered besides audio only places, but everyone was like, we love it. We don't know how to market this. Bye. And that has become the issue with Weird Westerners. People just won't do it. So we were down to either doing it ourselves or working with Blackstone, and they made an amazing pitch and offer and have been great to work with. So it would have been, and with them, since we had more of a personal connection with them, like we were able to help out a lot and use a lot of the things we know from Athon as well. But yeah, even for our Make Me No Grave by Haley Stone, which was actually Athon's first book that we ever published. The same thing happened to her. Every publisher was like, we love this, but it's Weird Western, so we can't do it.
Yeah.
Because they're all, it's P&L statements, and they need to look at comps and see what they did. And outside of Joe Lansdale and Jonathan Mayberry, no one's really making a lot of money in this space. So yeah, that was the main question, was like, who's this for? Let's write something short so that we don't get hooked into something where we're just writing for no reason.
Yeah. Roger, I know that the internet has changed the publishing landscape for sure, especially with the advent of the Kindle, and I think with everyone having smartphones now, I think that's probably the biggest factor in the growth of the audiobook industry, because we've got these devices with tons of storage, and we can download it, and we have earbuds that people walk around with, and audiobooks are just extremely accessible.
That's
I would
the word,
think,
yeah, accessible. It's
yeah,
people commuting. It's yeah.
right.
But I'll let you finish.
No, I was thinking that for a person like you, who is an actor, and then sometimes audiobook narrator, does the connectivity of the internet, has that opened up the things that you're able to do? Like do you have a home studio where you can record from and then send audio files to Audible, and like how has
Yeah.
that opened up possibilities for you?
I started working for Audible over a decade ago. And I remember hopping on the train to Newark and heading over to their office there. And I would work with amazing engineers. But as I got a little bit more experienced, it did eventually evolve to my home studio, which was just in time for COVID. I was very grateful for that, because, I certainly wouldn't have, without that home studio, I certainly wouldn't have been carrying on working. But yeah, I've been very, very fortunate in that, I've done a lot of stuff for Tantor, Audible, and now Blackstone, and, Penguin as well. And I love narrating audiobooks. It really is one of a passion of mine. And I love the fact that so many wonderful authors trust me with their work to do it. I wanted to ask you guys something. Going back to the supernatural aspect of the Western and the way that you so geniusly put a little spin on it. But I've noticed that, like, a lot of the flashbacks, for example, in the Black Badge series, they don't have the supernatural aspect. Before James is embraced in the afterlife, I noticed that. Did you guys specifically change the style, or just or mildly tweak it somehow? When you write about his flashbacks, it reads very much like the more traditional Western novel than when James is, obviously dealing with his angels and the afterlife. And I was wondering if there was any intentional way. Did you mildly tweak the style at all to suit that?
Well, I think just naturally you have to take out all of James's knowledge of what is to come. And so you're pulling a giant sort of portion of this person's, because we've talked before on the phone, like, this is a person to us. James is a human being, that he's not just a character in a book. He comes alive for you. We took all that, like, threw it away. Like, he doesn't know that Shar exists. He doesn't believe that heaven and hell exist, right? He's just an outlaw. The beauty with James was that, of course, he's the outlaw with a heart of gold. And although he's caught in the positions that he's in, he often finds himself not okay with how Ace is handling them. But he's sort of becoming a hero, even in his flashbacks. Your performance, and I hesitate to say Red Dead Redemption, because the reality is it honestly is your performance in Red Dead 2, because to me, Red Dead 2 not just graphically exceeds the first one, it exceeds the first one in every possible way.
Yeah.
And so much of that is you. Even things like the train robbery. One of my favorite things to do in Red Dead Redemption 2 is just ride up alongside a train with a horse, hop off, and go to town. And so, when Rhett and I were talking about tropes, right? He's like, well, we have to have a train robbery, right? And we actually fought tooth and nail, Rhett, if you remember, to figure out where this train robbery goes. We wanted it to be the opening. We wanted it to be the close, and neither of those two things work. And I think Rhett was the one that came up with the idea with the Vanderbilts, right? That was you.
Yeah,
that entire thing.
We were like, let's do another Ace flashback when, like, because it'll fit that moment. And again, I think a lot of the difference in style comes down to an editing thing, which is readers tend to complain about flashbacks. I don't know why, right? Like on TV shows, they're the bit like no one cares, and they're huge. Everyone uses them. In books, it's just an old editing thing, like no flashbacks, or if you have them, really short. So that's why the flashbacks are him doing stuff, dialogue, no expansion beyond that. Like we keep them really simple to keep the word count low, so they move fast, so the momentum of the story doesn't go away, and the flashback has a specific thematic purpose.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's probably the change in style. You lose that waxing, poetic Western thoughts, and it's more quickly telling a story of what happened in his mind. So that probably an incidental reason for the change, but the lack of magic is, we want to make sure people realize like normal people aren't part of this world, right? Even if the monsters they might meet in the wild, they kill them. That's why they become legends, or they come back and talk about them and they sound crazy, right? Like, so normal people aren't involved in this side of the world that he's seeing. So in his flashbacks, he can't know or see any of that stuff either.
Rhett, I want to ask you something. When you talked about flashbacks and how editors would be no flashbacks, are there rules in writing that need to be broken sometimes, or maybe there's just an opportune time for them to be broken, or it's kind of like Stephen King's book on writing. He says never use adverbs, and then you've got Neil Gaiman, who just feels like he's just scattering seed with adverbs sometimes. Like, are there hard and fast rules? And if those are hard and fast rules, how do you know when is the proper time to use them or to break those rules?
I mean, I think there's hard and fast rules as far as like it should look like a book, right? We get submissions sometimes that like don't write a paragraph that's an entire page long, because that just hurts your eyes, and like dialogue needs to work correctly and stuff. But beyond that, I think people get a little too hung up on it, and that's likely because the industry used to be controlled by, honestly, like it was a few editors, right? Even now, every publisher has like 30 imprints. There's so many editors who have different opinions on how things need to be. And what we've started to realize with Athon is the rules are different for every subgenre and every genre of what's acceptable, right? Like an info dump, every editor is like, don't do an info dump. You're like, well, how well? Like, people can't be lost in this science fiction book or this fantasy book. So in those genres, info dumps actually wind up being okay. If you're writing for audio, things are a little different too. I mean, my most successful book ever is Titanborn, which was with Random House, and I built the story around flashbacks, and there were like 3 or 4 flashbacks in it, and originally there was only one, and the editor actually encouraged me to add 2 more that would create sort of a 3-part arc to the flashbacks that's informing the present. And I think a lot of that is, again, I watch TV and movies more than I read, and I write in a style that is very TV and movie, where flashbacks are acceptable. And I think where flashbacks got a bad rap was sort of just using them as a crutch to explain a character and not having it really have any relevance to the story or anything. Where when I do a flashback, it means Steve do one, like that flashback is coming at a point where that character would be thinking about that exact moment, and that moment is affecting something that's happening in that present. Like it's a purpose. It's not just a way to boost word count or a way to fill in information on a character. So yeah, I mean, the rules exist for editors to have a way to structure a book, But now, as there's so many different ways to read, there's so many different rules that are different for every format, that I think you just need to be true to the voice of the book and the tone of the book, not write a serious book and then all of a sudden halfway through there's like becomes a comedy and then goes back, right? You'll see that in movies. Like some of the Marvel movies nail the comedy aspect.
Yeah.
Some it turns it into a joke and a lot of people wind up complaining. So you just have to really be true to the tone of the book and keep it consistent, I think.
Well, Black Badge started with a flashback. It's that's how I died, right? Like there's that moment, right, where we wrote how James Crowley died, and it took place 20 years before the actual story took place. And without flashbacks,
great start. Very, very, it grabs you.
Thanks, man. I don't think the story works. Cold as Hell does not work without flashbacks either, because we need to know who James Crowley was, and it can't just be James.
There's a definite evolution there. I mean, that's a huge transformation, and it demonstrates your intimate understanding of who he is, because you also intimately understand who he was.
Jaime and Rhett, you wrote this book with the benefit of knowing that Roger would voice not only this character but the whole story. A lot of times when you're writing a book, you don't have the benefit of knowing who will read this for the audiobook performance. When you're writing, especially someone who has such a strong dialect and a dialect that that gives us so much of the character, and it gives us not only his character, but it informs the place and the time that it comes from. And so much of that is woven directly into your prose, into the dialogue of it. Sometimes you don't have the benefit of being able to write a character that strongly, and you have to rely on dialogue tags and things like that. What is the difference in writing? I guess where I'm trying to get to is, what do you ever write dialects into the and slang into the dialogue so that it reads the way that a performer will perform it, or do you rely on describing the dialogue outside of the dialogue? Does that make any sense at all?
I write a lot of fantasy, and Rhett and I wrote a 1,000,000-word fantasy together. And when we had dwarves, they spoke in text. They spoke like dwarves. Roger actually did something tremendous with Cold as Hell. And I remember texting him. So I got an early copy of it and I'm listening through it. I mean, I listened through that so fast and then listened to it again. He did a character named Cedric that we didn't give him any instruction as to who that character was outside of he's a black man. That's about it, right? Like there's a moment where he is called dark-skinned. And Roger read him as a Yankee. He's a Pinkerton. And I remember, Roger, you remember I texted you. I'm like, that Cedric performance was absolutely phenomenal for me.
Oh, thanks. I remember the Pinkertons, I remembered a lot of the Pinkertons were from the East Coast, and they were literally invading the Wild West in more ways than one. It was also metaphorically as well as literally, and I wanted to make his voice very different and from all the Western characters. This is a guy from New York, he doesn't belong here, but he's taking, he's the sign of the future, sort of, if you will.
Yeah. No, and Hank, to your question, I think it really helps to know, but especially in first person, right? Like if you're doing third person, it's a little more narrative reliant. I mean, me and Steve are big subtext dialogue writers anyway, where we try to let the words tell how people feel more than needing to explain it. But yeah, I mean, even with my Children of Titan series, when I found out R.C. Bray was narrating, actually Steve edited the whole thing because he had listened to so many R.C. Bray books, so we could actually really fit it to his voice. And And that was just a benefit of having time before he was going to start. And so we like re-edited all the books. But yeah, it's tough because a lot of, I mean, me and Steve are really lucky. We run Athon. We have enormous access to narrators and audio publishers.
Yeah.
Typically, when we start writing something, we know who we're good at. Like at this point, if we want this certain narrator and they're not like a celebrity, we can get them, or we'll wait until they're ready. So that's going to be a lot different than a lot of these traditional published authors where, you know, they're getting audio a year later, or they basically aren't in control of the decision at all. Right. So it's hard to know. We're in a lucky position where we always know, or we know with enough lead time to then go back and edit it for that exact person. But that's not a benefit most authors are going to have, especially if they're not indie and like either producing it themselves or intimately involved in the production itself. That goes back to Roger saying sometimes he doesn't get to talk to the author. Sometimes when you're with a big publisher, you don't even know that you could talk to your narrator. Right. You get a sheet, you provide some pronunciations, and that's the end of it. They might not even want the author to talk to the narrator, because then the producer doesn't know all the information getting passed back and forth.
I mean, even with Athon, we have some policies with that, right? Because if we let every author have direct contact with the narrator, we don't know how often that author is going to suggest changes or suggest, you know, the narrator might get overwhelmed speaking with an author. And we know that from experience, because early on, Rhett and I didn't know the process. And I got in trouble once for messaging a narrator. Audible Studios has a you don't talk to the narrator rule unless we are all CC'd in that email. And I didn't know that. I had the dude's email address, and I shot him an email one day, and it blew up. It became a huge, major issue. And so that informed how Athon runs things. Okay, we give you a sheet, you give us this. If the narrator has questions, they ask us, we then ask you. And for us, it was to protect the narrator, because we know authors can get overwhelmingly excited about a performance of their book.
Or overwhelmingly picky about every voice. And at a certain point, the narrator needs to perform it how they want to perform it. So we kind of leave it up to the narrator. If they say, yeah, I'll talk to them or do a call, then we'll do it. But otherwise, that level of connection is rough. And, you know, it's a different case for us just because, you know, of running Athon, we have those connections. But for most authors, there probably isn't any communication with the narrator whatsoever. Some of the audio publishers don't even ask for a pronunciation list. Like if you don't provide it, they're going to do it however they want to do it.
Luke Daniels, Hall of Fame narrator, phenomenal narrator, right? He mispronounced so many words in the Buried Goddess saga. But like, they're not really mispronounced. They're just the way that he would have pronounced them. And so Rhett and I sort of adopted his pronunciations of things going forward.
Like we didn't know that ZH is supposed to sound like a J sound, right? Like, and that happened in that, or in Titanborn.
And in Buried
Goddess. In there's a character called Zaff, which was ZHAFF, and that was always his name. And then I didn't even put it in the pronunciation list because I didn't want to spell it ZAFF because that looks stupid. The H makes it look cool. RC Brave read it Jaff the whole book, and I was like, all right, well, I guess he's Jaff now. Who knew? And then we had Zulong in the Buried Goddess saga, and Luke Daniels read it Zulong, and so that was when we both learned ZH that's what it becomes, because apparently that's how it's phonetically supposed to be pronounced. So there's things that will surprise you in that sense, but some authors really can't take that level of change. And so that's why, you know, and some narrators want to ask a million questions, and some authors don't want to talk to anybody, right? So it controlling the communication does become sort of a necessity.
So just having an established process, it just keeps everyone out of trouble all around. Just hopefully. Hopefully. Roger, when you are presented with a new project, how do you choose the projects you're going to work on, and how long does it take you to get a feel for whether this is something that you will enjoy doing, or something that you can bring a certain character to life?
Well, I love all challenges, and I do a lot of nonfiction as well. I've done a lot of history books. I really do like to sink my teeth into lots and lots and lots of different types of books, but well, I'll look at the breakdown, and more often, sometimes the offer will be a straight up offer. Other times it'll be they'll ask me to read a couple of pages, and sometimes the pages that I choose are up to me, and sometimes the pages are up to them. And I study that intently before I submit. And I think with those, and I purposefully, for the purpose of that, I don't look at the rest of the book. If that's the bite that they want me to deal with, then that's the bite that they get. And I usually make my decision from that, because if it's not a firm offer, it's not very time economical to go through the whole book when you're preparing for it. So I usually go for somewhere in the beginning of the book, like in the first or second chapter, I'll pick 3 or 4 pages that I feel really showcase the main character and is a good demonstration of the author's style. And then I try and put my label on that, and then it's up to them to decide whether they think it's a good match or not.
Excellent. Cold as Hell Black Badge Series Book 1, which is actually the second edition in this series, is available now. You can the Dead Acre, the first novella, I guess it is, that was produced, is also available. We'll put links to it where you can find it easily. Jaime, Rhett, Roger, thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure.
Can I just say, Roger, thank you for joining. This is like, I'm fanboying.
Oh gosh, my pleasure, man. My pleasure. Thanks for. I'm sorry we had to change the time. Thanks for your flexibility.
That's okay.
It's all good. It's all good.